The Destruction Warlock. What were we expecting? Probably not much. Were we expecting the huge revamp like the Demonology got after it was declared too hard? Probably not. Were we expecting the same thing with Affliction, with the interest of reaping souls of the dead after reading about the staff? Probably not much either. It was also ominous by how long it took for Destruction to appear on Legion, although it did become apparent that the specs that were joining at the very far end of the alpha were in fact being delayed just because of their artifact quest, which was pretty enjoyable for Destruction. I don't think we were expecting much. Some cleanups, some tweaks, and what I have found after playing it for quite a long time, pre-alpha and over the last few days, is that Destruction is pretty good. It's pretty good. It still works exactly kind of as it did in the past. It's got some nice new features. They've removed some stuff though, and there's no getting away from that, and moved stuff around, which does lead to a couple of moments of So let's take a look at exactly what you're going to get with Destruction, and you'll understand what's happening. Alright? So the first thing you're probably going to notice when you log into your Legion Warlock is that Embers are gone and replaced with Soul Shards. I actually understand why they've made the change, as Soul Shards are now a more definitive thing to generate rather than the slow and incremental increase of Embers. However, I have to say, it's quite sad to see that the graphical animation of Embers has gone. It was quite nice to set on fire the more you had. I thought that quite fit the theme, which is what Legion's about all the same. So how do Soul Shards now work? Well, you have Immolate, which is still your go-to. You're not going to see many new spells here, and that has a chance every time it ticks to generate a Soul Shard, and it has an increased chance, double the chance of it critical strike. So once again, it's going to be all about the critical strike chance for the Destruction Warlock. Nothing to be surprised about there, I don't think. So once you generate your Soul Shards, and you'll get a guaranteed Soul Shard every time you conflagrate, this actually gives some really nice gameplay, if I'm being honest with you. Your Soul Shard generation is for the most part predictable, which means that you're not really worried about overcapping anymore, and you can plan it down to the T. Not only are you not worried about overcapping, but you can actually plan your burst windows really well by stocking up to double conflags about to hit, and then you know you got 2 extra Soul Shards, which works well with the talents. So overall, I think that is a really cool change. In between that, you're still going to be firing off Incinerates. Incinerates have absolutely no interaction, which is kind of a good thing given the talents. So they just do flat damage, no Soul Shard generation or anything coming from Incinerate. You are going to boil down to just doing that. Also, Havoc has been changed, so the gameplay has changed pretty much. Where previously a good player would have been preempting his Havoc to make sure he got most spells out as possible, potentially double compared to a weaker player, now your Havoc is going to work differently. It marks the target with Havoc for 20 seconds, causing all your single target spells to also strike the Havoc victim, limit 1 charge. Now you can augment that with your talents as well, which is quite cool. So let's jump into our talents, shall we? What you'll notice with the Destruction Warlock is pretty much everything on the left. I say pretty much, not entirely true, but pretty much everything on the left is single target, middle tier is for cleave, and right hand side is generally for AoE. So with Backdraft, which is on your left hand side, this is pretty much your single target. When you use Conflag, it reduces the cast time of your Incinerate and Chaos Bolt. This actually alters your gameplay quite significantly. Previously, you'd be keeping your Conflag on cooldown, right? Now you have to actually make sure that you're definitely getting the use out of the Backdraft. Whereas previously Backdraft was a buff and you could use it at any time. Now the fact that Backdraft is a short-term buff, you actually have to plan beforehand, otherwise you'll miss out on a significant portion of the buff that Backdraft actually gives. So that's really cool. You have to make sure that if you're going to conflag, what are you following it up with? Are you following it up with something important, or are you going to try and do something like conflag and then immolate, which is kind of a waste of time? Then you have Roaring Blaze. Conflag increases your remaining immolate damage on the target by 50%. Once again, just slightly altering how you think about conflag. Now you want to think about conflag as something you put up after you immolate. This is again just a slight nifty gameplay change. No need to add any extra buttons, but you have to think about how you play a Destruction Warlock differently. This follows the theme that we've seen with all the Warlock specs, is that the talent system is really, really good. It provides different gameplay that you can maximize to your absolute potential. I love this. Shadowburn. Shadowburn is in here as well. Some people have been getting a little confused with how Shadowburn works. It no longer only functions below 20% health. You can use it at any point whatsoever. It costs 1 Soul Shard, which is going to give you the equivalent damage of 1 Chaos Bolt, generally speaking. Chaos Bolt costs 2 Soul Shards now. Now, don't panic. That's okay. Chaos Bolt hits significantly harder in Legion than it does in Warlords of Draenor. Not only that, but Chaos Bolt actually benefits from a lot more stuff in terms of which damage bonuses you'll pick up in your artifact weapon. So some people were confused as to whether Shadowburn would replace Chaos Bolt and become like this instant cast turret movement. Shadowburn still retains its ability to generate 2 Soul Shards if the target dies within 5 seconds of you casting it. It's not the case. You're generally still going to use Shadow Burn as your execute ability. That's what you're going to be generally using it for. However, if you are on a ridiculous movement fight, you can weave in some Shadow Burns. However, it is generally always better to cast Chaos Bolt. It gets the Chaos damage component gets significantly more bonus than Shadow Burn does by just being flat shadow damage, okay? So that's something you need to bear in mind there. Very, very cool. I really like this. Once I actually played around with Shadowburn, I did become that sort of Horadon style Soul Shard Shadowburn turret, which many of you will know about, and you put out significant amounts of damage if you can actually weave it in, because you're just firing off so many with the Soul Shards regenerating. Really quite cool. Down we go to Reverse Entropy, which reduces the cast time of Chaos Bolt and Rain of Fire by 0.5 seconds, and they restore 35% of your maximum mana. I would say this is the single target ability because you barely ever life tap if you take Reverse Entropy. This point I want to point out that Rain of Fire has been changed. Obviously, in previous incarnations across a couple of expansions, Rain of Fire has had this confusing point where people were using it to generate embers, just the ticking damage, and using it to cast on the move. You can no longer do that, and the way they've come up with the solution for this, and also the solution to the lack of charred remains and AoE chaos bolts, is they've changed Rain of Fire to have 3 soul shard costs. That's really expensive, and people are going to go, ugh, but actually it makes total sense for what they're trying to achieve. It does a load of damage. It's like a chaos bolt's worth of damage, if not way more, depending on what level you're at currently in Legion. And it will hit every target for that amount of damage. That means that every time it gets to like 3+, it's way worth casting Rain of Fire because it's going to do loads and loads and loads and loads of DPS. It's a very hard-hitting spell. It's still the generic. It's got that 1.29 second cast time. You can't cast it on the move or anything like that. It's still the very generic AoE, but in order to solve the idea of Rain of Fire having this weird niche role where people are using it to move in certain situations and confusing bad players who were trying to use it on the move when they should have been doing different things, they've simply made it this really hard-hitting generic AoE spell that absolutely makes sense when you want to cast it, so that's pretty cool. Fire and Brimstone does still remain, however it just makes your Incinerates hit all targets. I think I should point something out here as we move along. Currently, the legendaries in Legion, and I did just mention Charred Remains is gone, so the 2 Soul Shard costs they've added to Chaos Bolt does mean that your Chaos Bolt carries way more weight when you fire it. It hits really fucking hard, okay? Which is what Chaos Bolt is supposed to do. And the Soul Shard limitation does mean that you can't really chain them back to back. However, I'm sure many of you are listening to that and going, oh, thank God, because Charred Remains made us spam Chaos Bolt all day and it felt just like a normal filler spell. Currently, if you take a lot of the Soul Shard regenerating talents and the legendary that refunds Soul Shards, many people are reporting even in long-ass boss fights of 6 or 7 minutes, I'm saying here, that they are not casting more than 4 Incinerates over that entire time. So that's something you need to bear in mind there. So, Fire and Brimstone and how much benefit you get from the Incinerate is questionable. When I've been AoEing, I found it, 1, way more fun to do things that don't include Incinerate, or generally just had no time to cast Incinerate, especially in dungeons and stuff. So, Fire and Brimstone is there. It only affects Incinerate. No more AoE Immolate, which is a real pisser, honestly. The only way you can AoE Immolate is via Cataclysm, which we'll get to soon. And that's basically because Immolate refunds a lot of shards, and they don't really want you doing that. So they're giving you no way of doing like AoE Immolate, AoE Conflag, or anything like that. Your Incinerate, you don't have to activate this. Your Incinerate will just naturally attack anything in front of you. Mana Tap still remains this deep into the beta. Please kill this. Kill this so quickly. It's so boring and so annoying to use. Really dislike it. From my personal perspective, and again, we're now months into this pre-Legion situation. I have yet to meet anybody who enjoys this talent. Please just kill it with a knife, Blizzard, and come up with anything else. For the love of God. So some CC at level 45, don't care. Level 60, Eradication. Eradication is really cool. The Destruction Warlock is not designed around having big mega burst windows and then being sort of fluffy and useless like a floppy dick for the remainder of the time. Destruction's designed around having regular, impactful attacks. That's why your Havoc's on such a short cooldown, yeah? You're supposed to have these very short windows, and Eradication backs that up really, really well. So Chaos Bolt increases the damage you deal to the target by 12% for 6 seconds. This means that you open the window. almost in a Colossus Smash style way. What you do is you fire off your Chaos Bolt, and then you have this window for 6 seconds where you have to make some choices. Are you going to fit in certain spells in there? You want to make them do more damage? Are you then going to fire another Chaos Bolt to extend the eradication window? Or are you going to close the window and allow your soul shards to build back up? Lots and lots of choice comes from eradication, creating these little windows. Really like that. Cataclysm, as I said, huge AoE, still does what it does, and immolates everything, which means your shards come out the arse, and you can fire off lots and lots of Rain of Fires, which just means your burst AoE potential as destruction is pretty fucking horrendous. It's so fucking crazy good. It's a big jizz fest. Soul Harvest still remains. Don't like this ability at all. Immediately generating 2 soul shards with a 2-second cast time. It feels annoying to use. The gameplay is actually really nice with Destruction, and Soul Harvest just doesn't fit into it. I get what it does, but I would rather it like generate soul shards over a period of time or something along those times, instead of just giving us 5 soul shards. You're very rarely out of soul shards. Even at Chaos Bolt firing 2 off, and the fact that some your immolate's generally going to be regenerating them, you're always feel like you're wasting it. I would love this to be an incremental over time, but I assume that's for balance purposes, but it fucking sucks. Demonic Circle is still in the talent tree and not just baseline. Fucking kill yourself, whoever made that decision. Burning Rush, Dark Pact, sure. Let's move down then to the tree that I said this the same with Affliction. This absolutely does not belong in the Destruction tier. It's so fucking wasteful. This should just be in the Demonology tree, and Destruction should have an entire tier dedicated to stuff that relates to Destruction, for Christ's sake. So we've got Grimoire of Supremacy, where you have your permanent Doomguard. Remember, you are giving up your DPS cooldown, because Doomguard is your DPS cooldown, as weak sauce as that fucking is. Grimoire of Service, where you get to summon your extra pet. You guys know all about that. And Grimoire of Sacrifice, blah, 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 blah. You guys have seen this before. Hopefully, if you're watching this video and looking at the previews of these classes, you should know what they're about. I will say one thing. They are really, really into you just using an imp as destruction. I don't want you to get angry, but you kind of probably should do, because why? Why can't I pick any of the demons that I have and have them fun? If I want to use a succubus, why can't I do that? So why am I saying that? In the artifact tree, there's a really horrible, horrible, horrible talent called Impish Incineration. This is going to buff the damage that your imp does. It's actually so important to destruction, apparently, that they've even gone ahead and made it so that like Sacrifice works well with it, and so does Grimoire of Service, to make sure that people aren't losing out on the benefit of it. Just why? Just let me use whatever pet I want to use. I want to base it on utility. I don't want to base it on anything else. My pets are really cool. They do really cool things. Can I not just do that? Is that not okay for some reason? Why is that not okay? I don't understand why they feel that they can give us these pets, the Imp, the Voidwalker, the Fell Hunter, the Succubus, the fucking Infernal, and the Doomguard, and then for some reason say, yeah, you have access to all those, and we've given all of them unique abilities, but you're not going to be able to use them, honestly. So, sorry. I don't know. I don't get it. So this entire tier, this level 90 tier, just feels like a waste of time for destruction. So at level 100 then, what do we get? Some surprises, honestly. So Wreak Havoc is there. So Wreak Havoc gives you permanent Havoc. Your Havoc now lasts for 20 seconds and has no cooldown. So this actually changed the gameplay. Earlier on I talked about the idea that a good player would be sort of preempting his Havoc. It's like a siege tank about to spawn while you're killing Blackhand. You drop your Havoc on Blackhand, then the siege tank spawns and you can lay into that, and then you get an extra Havoc before it dies, whereas other players probably don't get that. Wreak Havoc is now permanent. What this actually does is shift the gameplay pretty significantly to managing Havoc, which isn't something we've really had to do. So what I found myself doing a lot of the time was simply moving Havoc around and fitting it into my gameplay. This was quite a nice change. So it's not a case that you lost something skill-based. You actually gained something in return of that you use on a more regular basis. As the current version of Legion doesn't allow you to respec inside dungeons, I had to do a significant amount of dungeons in order to show off all the different talents in some way. At least get some testing in there, because I couldn't respec in the dungeons to try different ones out. What I found is that I found some really nice gameplay with Havoc, where I was shifting it around, because I obviously specking full single targets to show you that. I didn't have really much way of AoE. So in that respect, I used a lot of Wreak Havoc and stuff, and it actually worked out really, really well. Next to that is Channel Doomfire. Again, really surprised at how much I enjoyed this. As I said, Incinerate is really underwhelming. It's kind of boring. It just fires off, it just does damage, and it's literally something you press when you have nothing else to do whatsoever. Channel Doomfire hits really fucking hard. It has some cleave potential, because it hits any target that has Immolate on it, and it's something you want to keep on cooldown. It does a decent amount of damage. It does as much as a Chaos Bolt, if not more, and it doesn't cost anything. So if you are down to the situation where you're going to cast Incinerate, weaving in Channel Demon Fire is actually really nice, honestly. It has a really nice graphical component to it. I enjoyed it more than I thought I would. I looked at it and thought, this is just filler, it doesn't really do anything. But honestly, as something that adds into something that's already a filler, it's really quite nice. I was generally surprised at how much I found it being an interesting part of the gameplay, despite the fact it has no interaction, it does nothing else. It just breaks up the monotony that you sometimes run into of spamming Incinerate, waiting for something else to happen. You just have that extra thing to deal with, and it is basically the epitome of adding an extra button to your bar for people who like an extra button. But considering it does a decent amount of damage, it's nice to have that fallback that costs nothing, and it just channels away and does its thing. And it also looks quite cool, so I'm okay with that. The last one, Soul Conduit, is obviously the most boring, but potentially the most game-breaking. Soul Conduit just has every soul shard you spend has a 20% chance to be refunded. So obviously the more expensive things are, so your Chaos Bolt has like a 40%, Rain of Fire has 60%. You get the idea, right? So there's, you know, every soul shard you spend has a 20%. You can even say it doesn't work that way, but generally speaking, that's how it's felt. If you cast Rain of Fire, you generally get some good shards back. Chaos Bolt has a decent chance, etc, etc, etc. So the talent system is quite cool, honestly. There's some very gameplay in there. There's some good ways of maximizing. It's a nice change from what we had in Walls of Draenor without changing it too much unnecessarily, which is always the worry. Are they going to change things for no apparent reason? Which puts the Destruction Warlock in a solid place, but very similar to something you played before. There's nothing here that's going to blow your dick off, right? That's not going to happen. So with saying that, let's look at the artifact ability. The Dimensional Rift. Now, Dimensional Rift initially was confusing. I wasn't sure what it was about in the artifact quest, but then I got to play with it and realized you could cast it on the move. And that was fucking awesome because Destruction Warlocks have no mobility. They have Conflag that they can cast on the move, and that's about it. So it made sense that Dimensional Rift had two choices. As it has 3 charges, you could play on a heavy movement fight by banking those charges instead of using them for damage inside eradication windows and so on and so forth. Or you could use them for just pure DPS. So you could either save them for movement, so you could drop your portals all over the place, your rifts as you were moving, and use the charges that way, or use them for damage. I liked that gameplay. I thought that was really cool. They have changed it, probably because they don't want to homogenize every spec. This is the idea they have in Legion. And giving everybody something to be able to do on the move feels like homogenization for Blizzard. So they've removed the ability to cast it on the move. This has reduced Dimensional Rift to just being a spell that does damage, and you kind of don't want to let it sit at 3 charges. Now you can, if you use something like Eradication, you can weave it into there quite nicely. Other than that, it's just something that I think, if I was to make a suggestion as to why it exists, as it has no interaction with absolutely anything, there's an artifact ability which gives it a chance to reset the Dimensional Rift. They also fire different spells, the Rifts. Some of them do more damage than others, and it's entirely random. You have no choice over it from what I can tell. I was trying to see whether it worked by what did you cast last. So if I cast a Chaos Bolt, would I open a Dimensional Rift that would cast a Chaos Bolt? Well, that hasn't worked out, unfortunately, which is a bit of a bummer. You get some Demon Fire, you get some Chaos Bolts, you get some Shadow Bolts. It just does whatever it wants to do, generally speaking. It's just an ability for the sake of it. If I was to say why this spell exists, one, there was nothing really that needed to be added to the Destruction Toolkit, and comparative to Affliction and Demonology, graphically nowhere near as overwhelming. Everything the Destruction Warlock has, it's had for a couple of years now, well, 4 years now. So they were looking for something to maybe give it that graphical edge and to make it look like it made sense in a world where you got a million demons being spawned or dead souls floating around you all the time. And Dimensional Rift, for its lack of interesting uses, actually looks really cool when all the portals start generating and surround you. You do look really cool, I suppose, but it's got to be one of the most underwhelming artifact abilities I've seen in the game so far. Not that it really takes away anything, it just doesn't add anything. It's just an extra button, similar to Demon Fire, but it doesn't feel as good as Demon Fire because you don't really you have no control over what it does. It has no other component other than will appear, do some damage, and then it'll fucking disappear. Try not to let it sit on 3 charges. That's generally it. So my conclusion to this is you're going to get what you're going to get with Destruction Warlock. If you hated Destruction in the past, you're not going to change that now, probably. The gameplay they've given up to fix it has been replaced in other areas. So the gameplay level, skill ceiling, whatever you want to call it, is about the same. It has some nice interactions that you can make use of, just as it always has. But generally speaking, it is the big nuke spec of the Warlock. It's the big, like, smash something in the face with Chaos Bolt spec. That's what it's all about. Really happy they gave weight back to Chaos Bolt. Hated Charred Remains. And just seriously worried that they might end up with a spec here, particularly at really high crit levels. If your Immolate is giving off lots and lots of chances to get soul shards back, and you mix that with things like soul conduit, that ultimately the spec, or even very quickly, the spec could descend into just pressing Chaos Bolt with all the soul shards that are being generated elsewhere and being refunded at the same time. I would really hope that doesn't happen, because baseline is actually a lot of fun. The final artifact abilities to let you know of are, in fact, the Conflagration of Chaos. Conflag has a chance to guarantee your next Conflagration critically strikes. Nothing you can really do about that. It just does what it does. And Lord of Flames, which I'll show you in the background, which is once every 10 minutes, your Infernal's Meteor Strike will summon 3 additional Infernals to serve you for 25 seconds. Fortunately, mine weren't doing any damage, which is a bit of a pisser. But yeah, very cool, and something you want to keep an eye on. You get a 10-minute debuff saying you actually had the benefit of Lord of Flames. But if you want to work in an Infernal now, you have a little extra bonus, which is nice because people are getting really tired and sick of Doomguard, and I really wish Dark Soul was back, because it makes more sense in this world. So this Doomguard DPS cooldown or Infernal is just not clicking for me, but at least now we can probably see a lot more Infernals in use, because they're going to get the benefit of the Lord of Flames taunt. Alright? Thank you so much for watching, guys. I'll see you again. Bye-bye.